Excuse me, this is the operator. I'd like to remind all parties today's conference call is being recorded. If you have any objections, you may disconnect at this time. You may begin.
Well, thank you. This is Sean McVeigh, and the webinar we have right now is an executive summary for state leadership of ecological sites. It's a follow-up to a webinar we had just at 1 o'clock, ecological sites and the MLRA Soil Survey Office leader. Leading the teleconference today will be Susan Andrews and George Peacock. I would just ask that you note this first slide. Please do not put your phone on hold for any reason during the webinar. And unless you intend to be talking to all of us, please keep your phone muted. And you can unmute it and ask a question at any time, or we'll have time at the end to take questions then. With that, we'll go ahead and begin. Susan.
Thanks, Sean. So as Sean mentioned, we will have a half-hour presentation now to give you a brief overview of what ecological sites are and how the ecological site acceleration may affect you and your state. I'm Susan Andrews. I'm the National Leader for Soil Quality and Ecosystems at the National Soil Survey Center, and joining me today is George Peacock, the team leader of the National Grazing Lands Technology Development Team at the Central National Technology Support Center. To give you an overview of what we're going to cover today, we've got a slide to show you. We're going to cover a very brief history of ecological sites in our agency, the ecological site definitions and concepts, why are ecological sites useful, and how do they apply to conservation planning, and then go over operating procedures and goals and expectations for ecological site development. Ecological sites in NRCS were first introduced in 1997, and it put into a number of our manuals and handbooks, notably the Range and Pasture Handbook. The initial acceptance of these concepts was very slow and has only been adopted on a state-by-state basis, and at this point is primarily in the western and central regions. There was no national strategy for development of ecological sites. It was also most primarily adopted by range and later the forestry disciplines. In 2009, Chief White approved a decision memo to accelerate the development of ecological site descriptions. And this was an effort to improve both the quality of ecological site descriptions and standardize that development. And this is a joint effort between S&T, where this effort has been housed up to then, and SSRA. As part of this acceleration, there were a number of new hires, and myself and my team were some of them here at the Soil Quality and Ecosystems branch in Lincoln, and then a number of there are 6 actually, ESI specialists or QA specialists located at 6 different MO offices across the U.S., and then approximately 40 QC specialists also across the nation housed primarily in soil survey offices. And having this joint effort has really shown us that the distinctions between the two, what S&T is doing and what SSRA is doing, primarily Soil Survey Division, is somewhat artificial. Who's doing what really depends on relative strengths and weaknesses. But as a division, Soil Survey really offers that standardization, development of standards, the MLRA project planning process, and quality assurance and quality control mechanisms, whereas S&T and state SRC staff offer that vegetation expertise and experience with developing ecological site descriptions. And it takes both groups to really accelerate this effort. And if you take nothing else home from this presentation today, please take home that it's a joint effort between the two, and it's extremely important for us to work together to apply these ecological sciences to the conservation planning process. And George will now take over.
All right, thank you, Susan. Like Susan indicated, I'm just very briefly, just so that everybody's on the same page, kind of go through what ecological sites are, a little bit about the description and how they're used, just very briefly. This is a definition of an ecological site, and you can see it's quite long, so I'll try to break it down into its major components. But an ecological site is really just a conceptual division of a landscape that's defined as a distinctive kind of land based on recurring soil, land, geologic, and climatic characteristics that differs from other kinds of lands in its ability to produce a distinctive kind and amount of vegetation. And then also that differs in its ability to respond similarly to management actions and or natural disturbances. So in taking with that definition, I think as you look across any landscape, in most instances, it's not too difficult to recognize that some parts of the landscape are different from other parts of the landscape in regards to the kinds and amounts of vegetation that each are capable of producing. The environmental factors such as soil, climate, topography, they're all responsible for the development of the site's potential vegetation. And particular plant communities seem to reappear when these environmental factors are the same, and then that provides us with a basis then for our ecological site delineations. So that's kind of what constitutes an ecological site. Also, in how they respond to different management and disturbances, these different disturbances and stresses will affect the soil-plant interactions on a particular site, such as avidity, fire, drought. You notice here we've included cropping systems here. We also have kind of an initial efforts to look at how do we integrate agronomic systems into this same framework. But understanding that all these different kinds of mounds and different vegetation types that might occur on an ecological site, how do we begin to describe these dynamics that are associated with each ecological site? Well, then in the ecological site description, we'll do that with what we call a state and transition model. And the model is composed of a diagram, as you see here. And the diagram is composed of basically states, which are defined here by the large boxes, the transitions, which are the movement from between states, and the restoration pathways. If we want to return from a state back to another state, we identify those restoration pathways. And then the dynamics that goes on within a state, we identify the different community phases that may occur, and then the community pathways, we describe those that would cause a shift between different community phases. So within the state and transition model, there are those 5 components, and then we have the narrative that is associated with each one of those. There'll be a description associated with each one of those that provides a little more explanation. What I'd like to do is very quickly just walk through an example just to kind of give you an idea of what a state transition model might include. This is a deep redland ecological site, MLRA 81C. This ecological site historically was a tall midgrass savanna. There were herbivory associated with this site through buffalo, and then there was also this frequent fire interval, either caused by lightning or Native American Indians, that occurred on a pretty frequent interval. Adjacent to this site, there were other steep rocky sites which had a lot of juniper on them, and which provided a seed source for the juniper. The juniper then was always encroaching into this site. But because of that frequent fire interval and the juniper susceptibility at this young age to fire, then the fire kept the juniper under control, and that's what really maintained us in this oak savanna type aspect. So historically, this is kind of what we know was going on with this ecological site, and we would identify that as our reference state for this ecological site. But now what happens if we interrupt that fire frequency interval? For whatever means, fire suppression or overgrazing that reduces fine fuel loads where the fires won't carry anymore, whatever happens, But so we do introduce that disturbance into the system, then what happens? Well, that juniper now is not controlled by the fire, so it begins to grow, and then it gets to a point where the juniper then is no longer susceptible to those typical historic fires that occurred in this area. And at that point in time, we would recognize that we've crossed the threshold and are transitioning to a new state within that ecological site, which we identify here as State 2. And that once we transition into this new state, then the juniper begins to grow, and eventually you may end up with an oak-juniper complex with almost a solid canopy of oak and juniper as compared to an oak-savanna aspect. And we'd also see a significant change in the ecological processes that are associated between these two different states, both in the water cycle and in the nutrient cycle. So you see a significant change in how these sites, how the site functions, based compared to what it was in the reference state. So this is a lot of good information that would be available, and knowledge about this ecological site that would be, we can make available to our conservationists, land managers, and others to help them in making good management decisions. So now we would take that information and put it into that state and transition model that I was talking about. And here you see we have that reference state in State 1, which identifies what I talked about in the oak savanna with the frequent fire interval. And then also there's that transition to that oak juniper state, and we would have the narratives and photos associated with that. And then we also have the restoration if a person wanted to try to return back to that reference state, what management activities and restoration of processes would have to occur to allow you to do that. And there's also another state that occurs on this ecological site. Either one of those two states could be mechanically treated and reseeded to some type of native or introduced grass. At that point in time, you probably don't resemble your oak savanna anymore. Many of the oaks may have been removed. So again, that would just be another ecological or another state that would be identified on this ecological site. So you couple this with the narratives that would be associated in the ecological site description, and you can see that this would provide a significant amount of information, and very valuable information, to sitting down during the conservation planning process and working with a land manager, helping them to identify where they currently are today, based on their goals and objectives. Where do they want to go? Where do they want to be? Maybe they're already there, but I think you can see this provides a pretty good roadmap and a communication tool and working with a land manager. So while ESDs are useful, you think about those ecological sites and the delineations of on that landscape, that's the basic subdivision that we utilize for inventory and analysis of our landscapes. And any land inventory or analysis and the resulting management decisions require that you have a pretty good knowledge of those individual ecological sites, and also their interrelationships to one another on the landscape. The management interps will be included in the ecological site, or can be included. I think that's one of the areas that we really need to strengthen within our agencies. Interps for wildlife, grazing, wood products, if it's a forest, the ecological site, hydrology interpretations. I think there's numerous interpretations that could be associated with each one of these ecological sites, and I do believe that is one place in the agency where we need to really strengthen, and I think the S&T side of that is where we really need to put a lot of focus on that particular component. Also, support for agency initiatives. What if we had this type of information available in trying to achieve some of the goals that are associated with some of our initiatives, such as the longleaf pine or sage grouse? That would provide a tremendous amount of information in helping us reach the goals associated with those, and information on restoration type activities if you want to try to restore from one state to another. And then, as I mentioned a while ago, it also serves as an excellent tool for conservation planning. Looking at the conservation planning process, I identified that this should be our basic unit for subdividing the landscape for inventory and analysis. It also provides you with a tip reference for resource inventory and appropriate alternatives, looking at that state and transition model. Also can help you illustrate the consequences of management actions or no management actions. For example, in that deep redland site where the juniper gets up to about 3 to 4 feet tall, then it's no longer really susceptible to the typical type fires that would occur. So to me, that's a critical decision point. If the landowner has a significant acreages in the deep redland that are in that particular community phase, then that's a very critical decision point is, do I make a decision to reintroduce fire into the system, or do I accept the consequences of not doing that? Also provides us with guidance to how do we maintain those existing conditions, and it also helps us predict actions that we might need to transition to the desired plant community that will help us to meet our goal and objective. And here is just a list of some of the practice standards that are out there. But ecological sites information could be very useful in helping to achieve the objectives and purposes associated with these ecological these practices. And this is not an all-inclusive list. There's other practices, forest stand improvement, any of your planting top practices or management top practices would all benefit from the information that would be included in an ecological site description. And we're also beginning to see some of the states now beginning to take information from the ecological sites and try to develop some planning tools for their field offices to use. For example, here this upper table is associated with the Loamy and Loamy Upland ecological site that crosses over, that occurs in several different MLRAs, and what they've got here is allowable percentages for their seeding recommendations in seeding mixtures based on the ecological site descriptions that are associated with those in those MLRAs. And then the bottom table is looking at our forage suitability groups and looking at species suitability for planting on different sites. I think they get in this case they were giving it either a good, fair, or poor suitability rating for plantings associated with these ecological sites based on whether it was dry land or irrigated. So these are just some of the kind of tools that some of the states are beginning to look at associated with the ecological site information effort. And trying to wrap up just my piece, I think as you look at the ecological sites, I think they do provide a very standard reference for resource information for all of our federal agencies and interested groups. We have MOU with other agencies or interagency handbooks that we're working on with other agencies on ecological sites. NGOs, Nature Conservancy, other groups are very interested in the information also. So I do think that once developed, these do provide a basic standard reference that all groups and all agencies could use. I think that they're an excellent training tool and information source for a new conservationist that moves into a new field office. One of the first things you should do is you need to learn the soils. You need to learn the vegetation. Well, I think the ecological site also allows you to learn the soil-plant interactions that are associated out there. So I think it's a very good information source and a good training tool. And then it can be used to assess land resource values for different uses. And then also I think it would allow us to help prioritize and target some activities if we know that certain ecological sites are associated with certain initiatives, and if we were to target those, we could be more efficient in accomplishing the goals that we have set out for those initiatives. So that's just kind of a quick run-through of what an ecological site is. The information is in the site description, which is basically the state transition model, which is one of the major pieces, and then a little bit of information about how that can be beneficial and useful to the agency. With that, Susan, I'll turn it back to you to talk about the operating procedures.
Thanks, George. I'm going to now finish up the half an hour with a discussion of the various standards and guidances that we have primarily in draft form at this point, but are available for use if or at any point. So the operating procedures was released at the beginning of November for a 30-day comment period, and it at its heart is following the MLRA project planning process with a technical team developing the plan, the management team reviewing and offering technical assistance with the plan, and then sending it to the board of directors for final approval and approval of prioritization. This is nested within the idea of ecological site description development, where the site concepts are first developed here and put into the planning process, and then data collection and documentation takes place. A state and transition model is developed, as George mentioned, and it is entered into our our database, and finally, after quality control and quality assurance, is certified for use, and the state con gives final approval for use in the agency or each state's field office technical guide. So as the projects are managed, the board of directors, which is comprised of the state conservationists grouped by MO, approves and reviews all ecological site project plans. Again, this is like the MLRA process for soils as well. They also approve certified ecological site descriptions for use, again, in the EFOTOG. The management team, this is where it differs the most, has a broader composition than the management team for typical soils projects. This team is coordinated by the MO leader and is comprised of state soil scientists, SRCs, and technical specialists, both from the SRC staff and from any of the technical centers that as needed, and can also be populated with the MOQA specialists. And this group reviews project plans and prioritizes the plans, again, for approval by the board of directors. The technical team is led by the SSO leader and is populated by the QC specialists and then any needed regional, state, or local specialists, either within the agency or outside of the agency. And this group does the major heavy lifting. They develop the plans, and they accomplish the plans. To accomplish the task, as I mentioned early on, we need to have multidisciplinary groups. We need to have not only vegetation specialists, which could be foresters, agronomists, range specialists. We also need soil scientists and wildlife biologists as well to help with interpretation. This is now not just an NRCS effort, but an interagency effort at this point. We are in the final stages of developing an interagency handbook for rangeland ecological site descriptions. It's as a result of an MOU with the Forest Service and BLM. We also have quite a bit of interest from the Park Service and DOD and other agencies. We also need to involve other partners, including universities. The National Cooperative Soil Survey has a number of cooperators that are working with ecological sites, and NGOs. And the whole purpose of this is to link scientific knowledge of environmental sciences with local knowledge to create useful products for conservation planning. And shown here are a number of recent projects, and including a report that came out in support of the Chiefs Initiative for the prairie sagegrass. The approval and certification process is a combination of the MLRA process and some of the approval processes that have been in use in various states for ESDs. The certification of quality control is done by the SSO leader. The quality control review is done by the QC specialist, and content review by the vegetation specialist, the lead vegetation specialist on the project. And those two, the quality control reviewer and the content reviewer, are really very open-ended roles. So the QC specialist could potentially perform both. If there's no QC specialist, then a vegetation specialist could perform both. These are really very open, but it does allow for quality control review from both the soil survey side and from S&T. The certification of the ecological site description is done by the MO leader. Quality assurance is performed by the MO ESI specialist or QA specialist. Content approval is performed by state soil scientists and SRCs for the affected state or their designees. And approval for use in the state is done by the state conservationist on the board of directors for the state in which it is to be used. The goals and expectations that we have at this point include that progress reporting will be measured as a % of completion of the project milestones as they are outlined in the project plan. And this is different from typical soil survey projects, which are 1 or 2 years in length and performance is measured in acres. We'll use acres eventually, but many of these projects, particularly in areas where no ecological sites exist, in the east in particular, they will take 5+ years to accomplish, and we don't think that it would be beneficial to break these plans down into year-long components. It's much better, we feel, to get the science right and produce a quality product in the time that is needed. And in order to do that and still be able to track progress, we're proposing to use milestones and the % completion of each of these milestones as a way to track incremental progress in these longer plans. And if you're not familiar with the use of milestones, these are significant accomplishments in the project. And we do have guidance on milestones that has been reviewed by the state soil scientists and MO leaders, and that will be coming out very shortly for agency review, and we will have those milestones uploaded into NRCS at the same time. Acreage will eventually be counted, as I mentioned, but only for completed ESDs that meet the standards for content and after QA and QC and QA of the ESD. And we feel that at this time it's reasonable to expect, as a minimum, 1 project per soil survey office, and this is for soil survey offices with QC specialists. Now, there's nothing to say that those offices that don't have QC specialists, they are certainly welcome to begin projects, work on projects. We're just at a minimum, those projects those offices in your state that do have QC specialists should be working on a minimum of 1 project. And for a brand new QC specialist, it could take up to a year to put a project plan together to create the network of interdisciplinary specialists and look at that early reconnaissance data and develop a full project plan. And that, again, is a bare minimum. Wanted to mention about prioritization of these projects in a little bit more detail. This list is directly out of our draft standards for project management. We feel that the chief or NRCS initiatives should take priority when you're in an area that has an initiative like longleaf pine or prairie sage grouse. Then we should be working hard to get ecological sites developed on those in those areas, and then also areas of ecological significance such as at-risk areas, critical habitats, or habitats with threatened or endangered species, benchmark ecological sites, benchmark soils, and areas that contain major land uses of economic importance. Finally, detailed information on relatively few ecological sites can provide information for very large areas of land, potentially. And so what this means is this data has a large potential for extrapolation. It may take a good long while to develop ecological site descriptions from scratch, but once you do, you have information that can inform conservation on a large area of land. And it takes a combination of expert knowledge, historical data, and inventory from multiple disciplines to provide the defensible science for conservation planning that is contained in these ecological site descriptions. And again, that take home is we must include both soil and vegetation experts to succeed in this ESD acceleration process. Thank you for your time. We're just about out of time, but anyone who's willing to stay, George and I are happy to take your questions. You'll have to take your phone off mute to ask a question.
Now, Susan?
Yes.
Mark Dabney and Jorge in Missouri.
Hello.
Do you know at what point we can turn these on?
I'm not sure I follow. Turn
on an ESD?
Well, you can put things in ESIS right now.
I know we've got them in ESIS, but when can we upload them in NASA's where you can actually get
Oh, I see. Well, we have we are ready for programmers to start on the point data set in NASA's right now. We already have the business requirements, and Jim Fortner was in our earlier webinar. He is wrapping up the data model. We are waiting on a budget for the programming in Fort Collins, but we expect that to be done this year. And then Curtis Talbot on my staff is leading up the effort with Ray Stoner, Homer Sanchez, and others to develop business requirements for the ecological site description component, which will have all of the features of the current ESIS, but and hopefully quite a bit more, and eventually end up in Web Soil Survey with customizable reports. And it will all be very seamless. I mean, this is the plan, and going into the business requirements, and but that will be, I think, at a minimum 2 years away. And one thing I should have mentioned is all of those certifications that I mentioned, approvals and certifications, right now, as we move forward, once those standards are finalized and in effect, which should be no later than the beginning of the third quarter, that will have to be done on paper, but the plan is that we'll all be check boxes in the new and improved ESIS.
Very good. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Any other questions?
So, Susan, you're going to have 2 management teams then within the MLRA soils program? We have a current management team with just the state soil scientists on it. Now we're going to have 2, or you see that I'll be in 1, and now all of a sudden we're adding the SRCs and the SI quality people to our management team?
I see it as one management team where, when the project's being reviewed, our soils only, the newer folks don't have to be in the room. Does that make sense? So the state soil scientists are on the hook for both, but the SRCs and other specialists you only have to participate when the review is for ecological site projects. welcome to take feedback on that if you feel that that's a process that will be hung up or somehow limiting. Other ideas are welcome. We have gotten a lot of comments. I hadn't seen any that questioned that one, that part of the operating procedures.
Any other questions? If not, this will be the last call. All right.
Last call.
A recording of this webinar will be available in the coming days, and I'll send out an announcement of that and the location where to find them. And I just want to thank everyone for their participation. Have a rest of the day. Bye.